I remember the exact second the room went quiet. Crystal glasses midair, laughter cut clean in half. Every eye locked onto me like I had just broken a rule no one else even knew existed. Because this moment was never supposed to happen. 30 seconds earlier, a man worth millions had smirked and said, "Let the maid in." He expected humiliation. He expected whispers. He expected me to bow my head. Instead, I walked in like a queen, and the truth that followed would burn everything he built to the ground. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button, because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had been underestimated, dismissed, quietly crushed by people who thought power made them untouchable. Hundreds of strangers typing the same pain in different words, different countries, same silence, same shame, same rage swallowed down because speaking up felt dangerous. This story isn't about money. It's about control, and what happens when control slips. Let me take you back to the beginning, before the champagne, before the chandeliers, before the invitation that was never meant to be kind. I used to clean his house. Not manage, not assist, clean. Marble floors that reflected faces richer than mine, glass staircases I wasn't allowed to use, rooms so large they echoed when you cried in them. I learned the layout better than anyone, where the dust hid, where secrets lingered, where people whispered when they thought no one was listening. I wore gloves so thin they tore by noon. I learned to smile without teeth. I learned how to disappear. He never learned my name. To him, I was the maid, replaceable, invisible, convenient. But I watched everything. He was a self-made millionaire, they said, media darling, charity galas, interviews about humble beginnings. People loved him because he told them exactly what they wanted to hear, how hard work beats luck, how kindness costs nothing. Behind closed doors, kindness had conditions. His guests treated me like furniture. His friends joked about me, never to me. And when something went missing, cutlery, cufflinks, a misplaced watch, their eyes always found me first. I learned something dangerous back then. When people don't see you as human, they stop being careful. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. A thick envelope, cream paper, gold lettering, my name typed wrong. It was for his engagement party. At first, I laughed out loud alone in my kitchen because obviously this wasn't for me. I was staff. Staff doesn't get invited. Then I read the note inside. It would mean a lot if you attended. Dress appropriately. No signature, no warmth. Just a command pretending to be polite. Something in my stomach tightened. That slow, familiar warning, the one you get when kindness feels staged. I almost threw it away. I should have. The rumors started before the party. Another maid warned me in the supply room, whispered, eyes darting. "They're making bets," she said. "About what?" I asked. "How you'll look," she replied. "How long before you embarrass yourself?" I laughed again, but this time my throat burned. That night I didn't sleep, because suddenly everything made sense. They didn't invite me to be included. They invited me to be entertainment. A punchline dressed in borrowed confidence, proof that no matter how close you work with wealth, it never rubs off. A reminder to everyone there that some people are meant to serve and some people are meant to sit at the table. He wanted to humiliate me, publicly, elegantly, legally. And the worst part, he thought I wouldn't notice. For hours I stared at my reflection, same face I scrubbed floors with, same hands that folded other people's clothes, same woman who swallowed insults because rent doesn't wait for pride. Then I remembered something he didn't know, something I had never needed, until now. A past I kept quiet because survival doesn't reward honesty. I reached for my phone and made one call. The night of the party arrived in silk and arrogance. Luxury cars lined the driveway like trophies. Music floated through the garden, expensive and empty. Laughter rose in waves, loud enough to drown out guilt. Inside, he stood near the center, glass raised, already enjoying the performance he believed was coming. He didn't look at the door, not until it opened, not until the music faltered, not until silence spread like a crack through glass, because that's when I stepped inside, and nothing went the way he planned. The first thing I noticed wasn't his face. It was the way people stepped back. Not politely, not subtly, instinctively, as if the room itself needed space to understand what had just walked in. I felt it before I saw it, the shift, the unspoken recalculation happening behind expensive eyes. Conversations collapsing mid-sentence, smiles freezing, unsure whether to stay or disappear. I wasn't supposed to cause silence. I was supposed to cause laughter. And that's when I understood something powerful. They had already decided who I was. They just hadn't prepared for who I could be. I walked slowly, not because I was nervous, but because rushing would have looked like permission. The dress wasn't loud. That was the trick. No glitter, no excess, just clean lines, deep color, confidence stitched into every seam. The kind of elegance that doesn't beg for attention, it commands it. I could feel eyes following me, sliding from my shoes to my posture to my face, searching desperately for a flaw they could cling to, a crack they could mock later. They didn't find one. Then I saw him, the millionaire, the man who signed my paychecks without ever meeting my gaze. His smile was already fading by the time our eyes met. At first, he looked confused, then annoyed, then just for a fraction of a second, afraid. That second mattered, because power recognizes threats before pride does. He recovered quickly, too quickly, laughed louder than necessary, took a step forward like a host welcoming an honored guest. "Wow," he said, his voice polished. "I actually came." Actually. The word landed exactly as intended. I smiled back, soft, controlled. "Of course," I replied. "You invited me." Around us, people leaned in without realizing it. Humans always do when something unexpected smells like conflict. He gestured to the room. "Well, make yourself comfortable." Translation, know your place. I nodded and walked past him. I didn't head for the corners where staff stood. I didn't linger near exits. I walked straight toward the center of the room, and every step felt like crossing a line they didn't think I was allowed to see. That's when the whispers started. "Isn't she the... Did you see what she's wearing? Who invited her? This is awkward." Awkward is what people say when they're scared to admit they were wrong. I picked up a glass of champagne, real champagne, the good kind. No one stopped me, because uncertainty makes cowards of gatekeepers. Then came the first test. A woman in white, his fiancée, approached me with a smile sharpened by curiosity. She looked at me up and down slowly, deliberately. "So," she said, tilting her head, "how do you know him?" The trap was obvious. If I said I clean his house, I'd shrink. If I lied, I'd be exposed. I met her eyes. "We've known each other for years," I said calmly. Not a lie, just not the story they expected. Her smile stiffened. "Doing what exactly?" I took a sip of champagne, let the pause stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. "Observing," I said. The word lingered between us. She laughed nervously. "Right. Well, enjoy the party." But she didn't move away immediately, because something about my certainty didn't fit the narrative she'd been rehearsing. Across the room, I felt his gaze drilling into me. He was losing control of the room, and he knew it. So he did what men like him always do when threatened publicly. He raised his glass. "Everyone," he called out, his voice smooth but forced. "I just want to say how proud I am of this evening. Success to me is about bringing people together from all walks of life." Some people smiled, others glanced at me. "And tonight," he added, eyes locking onto mine, "we have a very special guest, someone who reminds us where we all start." There it was, the humiliation wrapped in applause. He gestured toward me. "Why don't you come up here? Don't be shy." My heart beat once, hard. This was the moment he'd planned, the stage, the spotlight, the polite cruelty of letting me stand beside him like a trophy of charity. If I refused, I'd look ashamed. If I complied, I'd be exposed. Either way, he believed he'd win. I set my glass down, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward him. With every step, I felt the weight of my past pressing against my back, the nights I scrubbed floors while people laughed above me, the insults swallowed, the face I saw in the crowd didn't belong in that room. Not because they weren't dressed well, not because they looked out of place, but because they knew me before I became invisible. My pulse stuttered. He stood half hidden near the terrace doors, suit immaculate, posture calm, but his eyes were locked on me with something far heavier than curiosity, recognition. And suddenly the room felt smaller. I tightened my grip on the microphone. The millionaire, still smiling, still playing the benevolent host, had no idea what that single face had just changed, because secrets are dangerous on their own. But witnesses? Witnesses turn secrets into weapons. I didn't speak right away. Silence stretched. People shifted. Someone coughed. The fiancé's smile thinned into a line of irritation. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. I was supposed to ramble, to apologize for existing, to thank him for his generosity. Instead, I looked around the room. At the art on the walls I'd dusted every morning, at the chandelier I'd polished until my arms shook, at the people who had stepped over me without seeing me. Then I spoke. "Do you know what's interesting?" I said evenly, my voice carrying further than I expected. "About being underestimated?" A few polite laughs, uncertain. "You hear things people assume you'll never understand." Pause. "You see patterns people think are invisible." The millionaire's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. I continued. "I've learned who tells the truth when they think it doesn't matter." The room grew quiet again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was attention. He chuckled, trying to steer it back. "Well, that's one way to put it." I turned to him. "Is it?" He opened his mouth. I kept going. "I've cleaned this house for years. I know where the cameras are." Murmurs rippled. I know which doors lock from the outside. More murmurs. And I know which rooms people use when they don't want to be seen. The fiancé stiffened. Someone near the front whispered, "What is this?" Exactly. The millionaire laughed again, louder this time, too loud. "All right," he said, waving a hand. "This is all very poetic, but let's not turn this into a confession," I finished calmly. The word dropped like glass shattering on marble. He froze, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. I turned back to the crowd. I was invited here tonight as a joke, as proof of generosity, as entertainment. Some faces flushed, others looked away. But I accepted because tonight I realized something. I looked directly at him again. You forgot who was listening. The room erupted in whispers now, sharp, urgent, contagious. What is she implying? Is this some kind of stunt? Did you know about this? The fiancé took a step toward him. What is she talking about? He didn't answer her because he was staring at me like a man watching the floor collapse under his feet. Then someone clapped, once, slow. Everyone turned. It was the man near the terrace doors, the familiar face. He stepped forward into the light. "I was wondering when you'd say something," he said calmly. Gasps spread through the room like a shock wave, because now they recognized him, a former business partner, a name that had vanished quietly from headlines 2 years earlier, a mutual separation, the article said. No scandal, no explanation, just gone. He looked at the millionaire, not with anger, but with something colder. "I see you still enjoy controlling the narrative," he added. The fiancé's breath caught. "You know him?" The man smiled thinly, intimately. The millionaire finally found his voice. "This is inappropriate," he snapped. "Security!" "No," the man interrupted. "Let her finish." The authority in his tone stopped the room. He turned to me. "Go on." I nodded. "I didn't come here for revenge," I said. "I came because humiliation only works when the truth stays hidden." I reached into my clutch. The sound of paper sliding free was louder than the music had ever been. "These," I said, holding them up, "are copies, emails, transactions, dates." The fiancé stared at the papers like they might explode. "You told me everything was clean," she whispered to him. He didn't look at her. He was watching me. "You used me because you thought I was desperate, because you thought I needed the job more than I needed dignity." I took a step closer. "But desperation makes people observant." His jaw clenched. "I saw the accounts you didn't want audited. I heard the calls you took in the West Wing, and I watched you blame others for decisions you made." The man beside me nodded once. "She's not exaggerating," he said. "I warned you." The room was silent now. No whispers, no laughter, just the sound of truth settling in. The fiancé backed away from him slowly. "You said she was just the maid," she whispered to him. I met her eyes. "I was," I replied. "That doesn't mean I was blind." The millionaire took a step toward me, his voice low and dangerous. "You think this will end well for you?" I didn't flinch. "It already has." Because in that moment, I realized the sound of cuffs clicking shut was quiet, almost polite. But in a room built on illusions, it was deafening. No one spoke. No one moved. They just stared as security, no longer smiling, no longer decorative, escorted the man they had applauded minutes earlier toward the side corridor. His fiancée stood frozen, one hand covering her mouth, eyes wide with something that looked a lot like regret. And in the center of it all, there was me, still holding the microphone, still standing. "I think we should all take a breath," I said calmly. It shocked them more than the confrontation had, because they expected shouting, tears, chaos. not control. The former business partner stepped beside me, his presence grounding. "For those of you confused," he said, voice steady, "this isn't a misunderstanding. It's a delayed consequence." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some checked their phones. Others avoided eye contact entirely. "That man," he continued, gesturing toward the corridor, "built his empire by borrowing trust he never intended to return." The words landed heavy. I finally lowered the microphone. My hands were steady. That surprised me, because I wasn't running on anger anymore. I was running on release. People started to leave, not dramatically, not in protest, but quietly, like guests slipping out of a funeral before the body is cold. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Champagne glasses were abandoned half full. No one wanted to be present when the story changed. The fiancée approached me then, slowly. Her voice shook. "You could have ruined everything." I looked at her, not with triumph, not with cruelty, but with honesty. He already did. I just stopped cleaning it up. Her shoulders sagged, and just like that, the illusion of her perfect life cracked. Outside, sirens whispered into the night. Inside, the house felt smaller, cheaper, like a stage after the audience leaves. The former partner exhaled. "You were brave," he said quietly. I shook my head. I was tired. There's a difference. After that night, the world moved fast. Too fast. Headlines appeared before I even slept. Billionaire's engagement party ends in scandal. Insider exposes financial misconduct, power, silence, and the cost of underestimating people. They didn't print my name at first. They called me the Maid, then the whistleblower, then something else entirely. My phone didn't stop ringing. Journalists, lawyers, people who suddenly remembered me, people who had never known me but wanted a piece of the story. I ignored most of them, because something more important was happening. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself. I quit my job the next morning, left the uniform folded neatly on the counter. No note. I'd already said everything that mattered. Weeks passed. Investigations deepened. More names surfaced. More stories followed mine. Assistants, drivers, junior analysts, people who had seen pieces of the same truth but thought they were alone. They weren't. They just needed someone to go first. One afternoon, I received an email. No subject line, just a sentence. "I watched your video. Thank you for saying what I couldn't." That was the moment I understood the real impact. Not the money lost, not the reputation destroyed, but the silence broken. The former partner and I met once more. Coffee, neutral ground. "They'll offer settlements," he warned. "They'll try to make this disappear." I smiled. I already disappeared once. I'm not doing it again. He nodded, respect clear. I started telling my story online, not for fame, for clarity, for the people scrubbing floors, answering phones, holding doors open, listening to conversations they're not supposed to hear. Every video brought more comments, more shared pain, more courage. But not everyone was grateful. Threats came, anonymous messages, warnings disguised as concern. "Be careful, you're poking powerful people. Know when to stop." I read them all and kept going, because fear only works when it's private, and mine wasn't anymore. One night as I scrolled through comments, I saw a familiar username, a name I recognized from the party, one of the guests. They wrote, "I laughed when you walked in. I'm ashamed. I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, "Do better next time." But just when I thought the storm had passed, I received a message that made my chest tighten. A name I hadn't seen since that night. The fiancé. 3 words. We need to talk. I stared at the message for a long time. We need to talk. 3 simple words, heavy with history, heavier with consequence. I didn't reply immediately, because when people say, "we need to talk," what they usually mean is, "I need something," and I had learned, painfully, how expensive that could be. That night, sleep didn't come easily, not because I was afraid of her, but because her message dragged memories back to the surface, memories I hadn't shared with anyone online, pieces of the story I had cut out to make it survivable. People love heroes. They don't always love the messy truth behind them. I met her 2 days later. Neutral place, glass walls, daylight, witnesses. She looked different, not ruined, not broken, just smaller. The confidence she wore at the party, sharp, rehearsed, polished, was gone. In its place was something raw and unfamiliar, uncertainty. She didn't waste time. "I didn't know," she said, the words tumbling out like they'd been waiting. "About the accounts, about what he was doing, about you." I studied her face. People can lie with their mouths, but their eyes tell stories they don't realize they're narrating. Hers were tired. "You knew enough," I replied quietly. She flinched. "I knew he liked control," she admitted. "I didn't know how far it went." I thought about the way she looked at me that night, measuring, dismissive, secure in her position. Control doesn't grow overnight. It just gets better at hiding. She wrapped her hands around her coffee like it was the only solid thing left in her world. "They froze the accounts," she whispered. "Everything is under review. The wedding is postponed." She didn't say canceled. Hope dies last. She looked up at me then. "I need to understand. Why you?" There it was. Not what he did, not how it happened. Why me? I leaned back. "Because I was always there and never counted." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I held her gaze. I was in the room when deals were discussed. I was in the hallway when threats were whispered. I was in the house when anger had nowhere else to go. Her lips parted slightly. "He didn't see me as a risk," she continued. "He saw me as background noise." That realization hit her slowly, painfully. "You weren't special to him," I added. "You were visible." She swallowed. "And visibility," I said softly, "comes with blind spots." She sat back stunned. "I defended him," she murmured. "I defended him to my family, to my friends." I nodded. "So did I said, just in different ways. For a moment we sat in silence. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. "What happens now?" I smiled faintly. "Now," I said, "now the truth does what it always does." "And that is?" she asked. "It spreads." She hesitated. "They're offering arrangements, settlements, if you stop posting." There it was, the price of silence. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "They always do," I said. "And?" she pressed. And I said no. Her shoulders slumped, not in disappointment, but relief. She leaned forward. "There are things I know," she said carefully, "things I didn't think mattered at the time." My pulse quickened. "Like what?" She glanced around, lowered her voice. "Names," she said, "places, offshore structures, people who helped him clean the trail." I held still, because this wasn't about me anymore. This was bigger. "Why tell me?" I asked. She met my eyes. "Because you're the only one who didn't pretend, and because I don't want to be silent again." That night, after we parted, I walked for hours, past storefronts, past reflections, past the version of myself that used to shrink in rooms like that party. The story had grown, and it was no longer mine alone. I posted my next video differently. The photo stayed on my screen long after my phone went dark. Same coat I'd worn that morning, same street corner, same coffee cup in my hand. Someone had been close enough to see the steam rise. This wasn't intimidation anymore. It was surveillance. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I did something far more dangerous. I got quiet. Because panic is what they expect. Silence is what confuses them. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, then to the investigator assigned to the case. Then, after a long pause, I opened my notes app and started writing everything I hadn't said yet. Names, dates, moments that felt small at the time but now pulsed with meaning. If something happened to me, the truth would still move. That thought steadied my hands. For the first time since the party, I went dark online. No videos, no updates, no replies. People noticed immediately. Messages flooded in. "Are you okay? Did they get to you? Please don't stop." I read every one and waited. 3 days later, the call came. Blocked number. I answered anyway. "Smart girl," a man's voice said, smooth and unhurried. "Taking a break." I said nothing. "People like you," he continued, "they don't understand how this works. Stories have limits. Curiosity has consequences." Still, I stayed silent. Silence unnerves men who are used to control. "You've made your point," he said. "Now it's time to move on." "I don't take orders from strangers," I replied calmly. A chuckle. "You're not in a position to be brave." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "You're wrong," I said. "I'm in the perfect position." The line went dead. That night I didn't go home. I stayed with a friend. Lights off, curtains drawn, and for the first time, fear crept in. Not loud, not dramatic, but slow. What if they ruined me quietly? What if the truth didn't matter enough? Then I remembered the comments, the messages, the people who had already stepped forward, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, everything changed. I woke up to my phone vibrating nonstop. News alerts, missed calls, emails marked urgent. I opened the first headline: "Major financial figure arrested in multinational fraud investigation." Another: "Former associates turn state evidence." Another: "Whistleblower protection activated in high-profile case." My breath caught. Protection? They weren't just watching anymore. They were moving. By noon, agents were at my door. Official, calm, efficient. They explained things carefully. There had been a mistake, they said, a belief that intimidation would work, a final attempt to silence a story that had already grown teeth. "They underestimated you," one agent said quietly. I almost laughed. The unknown number never called again. Instead, subpoenas flew. Assets frozen, travel restricted, allies vanished. Power has a way of evaporating when light hits it. Still, something felt unfinished, loose, because the man at the center of it all, the millionaire who invited me to be humiliated, had not spoken publicly. No apology, no denial, just silence. and silence in his world meant strategy. 2 weeks later, I was asked to testify. Closed session, no cameras, just truth. I told them everything. Not emotionally, not dramatically, precisely. When I finished, one of the officials leaned back and exhaled. "You understand," he said, "that this will become public." "I hope so," I replied. That evening, I broke my silence online. One video, no editing, no music, just me. I went quiet because I needed to be safe. I'm speaking now because I need to be clear. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The truth had its own gravity now. The response was overwhelming. Not praise, support. From people who had been threatened before, from people who had been told to know their place, from people who thought power was permanent. It isn't. It's borrowed. Then came the message I never expected. From him. Not a lawyer, not an intermediary. Him. One sentence. "You think you've won." I stared at it, then typed back. "You think you're finally being seen." No reply followed, but I knew this wasn't over yet, because men like him don't lose quietly. They wait. 2 days later, a court date was set, public, televised, and for the courthouse steps were already crowded when I arrived. Cameras, security, strangers pretending not to stare. I felt every eye land on me. Not with curiosity this time, but recognition. They knew who I was now. Not the maid, not the joke. The woman who broke the silence. Inside, the air was heavy with expectation. Polished wood, cold benches, a room designed to make people feel small. I had cleaned places like this before, just not under this kind of light. I took my seat, and then I saw him. The millionaire sat at the defense table, suit perfectly tailored, posture immaculate. If you didn't know the story, you'd think he belonged there, like the room was built for men like him. He didn't look at me at first. That told me everything, because men who believe they're still in control don't avoid eye contact. When the judge entered, the room snapped to attention. Proceedings began. Charges were read. Fraud, coercion, intimidation, obstruction. Each word landed like a crack in marble. Still, he didn't react until my name was called. I stood. The sound of my shoes against the floor echoed louder than it should have. As I walked to the witness stand, I felt the weight of the moment press down. Not fear, but responsibility. This wasn't just my story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told to stay quiet. I raised my hand, swore the oath, sat. And finally, he looked at me. Not with arrogance, not with amusement, with calculation. The same look he wore the night of the party when he realized he'd misjudged the room. The prosecutor began gently. "Can you tell the court how you knew the defendant?" I took a breath. "I worked in his home," I said, "for several years." "What was your role?" "I cleaned," I replied, and I listened. A ripple moved through the gallery. I spoke clearly about overheard conversations, about documents left carelessly behind, about threats disguised as jokes. I described patterns, not accusations, because patterns are harder to deny. Then the defense stood, and everything sharpened. The defense attorney smiled, a practiced, sympathetic expression. "You're saying," he began, "that despite having no formal position, no financial training, and no authority, you somehow understood complex financial crimes. The implication was obvious. I was reaching. I was confused. I was exaggerating. I met his eyes. I'm saying, I replied evenly, that when someone repeats the same lie often enough, you don't need a degree to recognize it. Murmurs spread. The judge tapped the gavel. The attorney pressed harder. You were invited to a private event, weren't you? Yes. And you chose to embarrass the defendant publicly? No. I chose to stop being embarrassed privately. That landed hard. He tried another angle. You benefited from this exposure, didn't you? Media attention, online platforms, donations? I nodded. Yes, I said. I benefited from telling the truth. He scoffed. And you expect this court to believe that wasn't your intention all along? I leaned forward slightly. If it was, I said, I would have stayed quiet longer. Silence pays better until it doesn't. The courtroom went still. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The prosecutor held up an exhibit, a printed message, the photo, the threat. Do you recognize this? She asked. My throat tightened. Yes, I said. I received it after I began cooperating. And did the defendant ever instruct anyone to contact you? I glanced at him. He was watching me now. Hard. No, I replied. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the air. Power doesn't give orders. It implies consequences. Then the prosecutor called the next witness, the former business partner. He took the stand calmly, confirmed timelines, confirmed transactions, confirmed threats. Brick by brick, the walls closed in. The defense objected. Voices rose. The judge restored order. And then, unexpectedly, the judge addressed the defendant directly. Would you like to respond? A pause. Every camera leaned forward. He stood, slowly, confidently. For years, he began, I've built companies, created jobs, helped communities. I felt a familiar irritation, the performance. But today, he continued, my character is being judged based on accusations from disgruntled individuals. Disgruntled. There it was. He turned toward me. You, he said, pointing, were invited into my home, trusted, and now you stand here trying to destroy me. I didn't move. The judge watched closely. Is that your testimony? The judge asked. Yes, he replied smoothly. I believe this is retaliation. The room buzzed. Then the prosecutor called the next witness, the former business partner. He took the verdict didn't come with drama. No gasps, no shouting, no cinematic pause. Just words. Clear. Deliberate. Irreversible. Guilty. I didn't smile when I heard it. I didn't cry either. Because the truth is, justice rarely feels like celebration. It feels like weight finally being set down after carrying it for far too long. He stood there as the sentence was read, face stiff, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the room, like if he refused to look at reality, it might lose interest and walk away. It didn't. When they let him out, cameras flashing, voices shouting, I noticed something small but important. No one applauded him anymore. Outside the courthouse, the world kept moving. Cars passed, people scrolled on their phones, a street musician played off-key nearby. Life didn't pause for the fall of a powerful man, and that was the point. Power only feels permanent when we mistake it for gravity. That night, I went home alone. No interviews, no statements, no victory speech. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and let the silence settle. For the first time in years, it didn't feel threatening. It felt earned. In the weeks that followed, things changed quietly, not dramatically, not perfectly, but meaningfully. The online noise faded, replaced by something steadier. Messages still came, but they were different now, not asking, "How did you do it?" but saying, "Because of you, I spoke up." A receptionist who reported harassment, an assistant who refused to falsify documents, a cleaner who finally reported abuse. People who had learned the same lesson I had. Too late, but not too late to matter. I didn't become rich. I didn't become famous in the way people imagine. I became free. Free from swallowing words, free from shrinking rooms, free from believing silence was safety. One afternoon, months later, I passed the house I used to clean. The gates were locked, the windows dark. The sign out front read, "Under investigation." For a moment, I stood there, hands in my pockets, heart steady. I felt no triumph, just clarity. Humiliation is a weapon used by people who are terrified of equality. They invite you in not to welcome you, but to remind you where they think you belong. The mistake they make is they assume you won't notice the door. Here's the truth no one tells you. You don't have to be powerful to be dangerous. You just have to be paying attention. I used to believe dignity was something you earned after success. I was wrong. Dignity is something you claim the moment you stop apologizing for existing. If you're listening to this and you feel invisible, if someone has made you feel small on purpose, if you've been invited into a room only to be reminded you don't belong, remember this. They wouldn't need to humiliate you if they weren't afraid of what you could become. I was invited to be a joke. I arrived as a mirror, and they didn't like what they saw. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about exposure, about what happens when silence ends, about what changes when the people no one notices decide to stop looking away. So here's the moral, simple and uncomfortable. Never underestimate the person who sees everything and says nothing, because one day they'll speak, and when they do, the room will finally go quiet.